Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Marketo Engage Champion Office Hours for the month of October. I'm excited to be here with our panelists, so I'll introduce in a few slides, but today we're going to run through some introductions, traditional house rules, housekeeping, some upcoming Adobe opportunities, and then we will jump right on into our Q&A panel. So the Adobe Marketo Engage user group house rules include, we want to keep this a safe space for people to learn, to keep it user focused. So we ask that anyone who's attending, please no self-promotion or pitching of any kind. Don't contact the people outside of the user group without their consent. And if there are any use cases that are shared today, please don't share that information beyond this group without their consent as well. A little housekeeping, we are recording the meeting and it will be posted at mugs.marketo.com. The slides will also be posted along with any resources that our champions mentioned today. And you will each get the recording, the slides by email. All right, so for introductions, I'm Chloe Pott. I'm a Senior Marketing Operations Manager at Localize. I am a multi-time Marketo champion and I've been using Marketo Engage for about 7 or 8 years now. It's my tool of preference. I've dabbled in a couple others, HubSpot, Autopilot, Eloqua, but I definitely bleed purple and red as much as I can. And I'm excited to be joined by my fellow champions today, and I will let them each give a little sentence or two on themselves. Michael, why don't you get us started?
Oh, all right. Hi, Chloe, thanks for moderating this. My name is Michael Tucker. I'm the founder of a Adobe Bronze certified consultancy. We're called the Conversion Store. We've been working in marketing automation for, I guess we're coming up on 5 years now. 3-time Marketo certified expert. My pronouns are he and him. And based out of Charlotte, North Carolina, but we work on instances all over the place. And just happy to be able to answer some questions for all of you today.
Thank you, Michael. I forgot to mention my pronouns. My pronouns are she and her. All right, let's go over to Alex.
Thanks, Chloe. Alex Greger, Marketing Operations and Technology Manager at Lucian. I've been a multi-year champion as well. I run the local Cleveland Marketo user group, not Mug. And I have been in Marketo for 6 or 7 years now, have been in a lot of the kind of exterior products around marketing technology ecosystem, and similar to Chloe, have dabbled in a few of the others, but have a preference of Marketo and Adobe. My pronouns are he and him. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. All right, let's go down to Tobe. Sorry.
You're
Courtney.
fine. Everyone calls me Tobe. Like, I grew up playing sports and played field hockey in college, so I just respond to it. That's what everyone called me. But I'm Courtney Tobe. I'm the Senior Manager of Marketing Operations at Avid Exchange, also located in Charlotte, North Carolina, so close to Michael. I've been working in Marketo for almost 8 years now, which is hard to believe. It's also my tool of preference, but I've worked in HubSpot as well. I've been a 2 times Marketo champion, 3 times Marketo certified expert, and my pronouns are she and her.
Thank you. And my fellow European, kind of, John.
Kind of. Hi, everyone. John Grundy, pronouns he, him. I work with Accenture Interactive based in the Netherlands, looking after the marketing platforms, solution services we offer there. Of course, which Marketo, yeah, the one we focus on, first-time champion, couple times certified. I think using Marketo probably 5-6 years now in that time. So,
well, thank you each for joining us. Let's get into a few more housekeeping slides and then we'll get started. Some upcoming opportunities with Marketo Engage. If you're not already part of the Mug chapter, you can get invites to all. We do the champion office hours on a monthly basis, organized by our lovely Amy Goldfine, who is in the back office chatting to everyone now. You can sign up and get the monthly reminders of our next office hours. And if you need to update your certification, or if you haven't done it yet, you have until the end of the year to take the existing Marketo certified exam. because starting 2022, they are sunsetting the old exam and using a completely new one that's been revamped and designed by other Marketo champions and other users. I believe that's it for the exams, and that's it. Let's get into our questions today. All right, let's start with something pretty generic. Fellow champions, what are your thoughts on a marketing operations director with no campaign operations experience? Courtney, what do you think about this?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. And I think there are probably lots of differing opinions here, but campaign operations is so much of just day-to-day life in marketing operations that I feel like it's extremely important for someone to at least have a strong understanding of how valuable that is, how much time it can actually take up. So if they don't really have any hands-on experience with it themselves, then they should at least have some sort of experience managing a team, working with some sort of consultancy who has helped handle that part of just day-to-day operations for them, just because it really can be such a time constraint with how quickly you need to turn things around. Programs can often take longer than what you expect them to take. It's just such a critical part of the role. Does
That's
anyone
really
else
insightful.
have, similar opinions, differing opinions on that?
Yeah, I like a lot of what you're saying there. I think the added element, maybe, just thinking about, okay, not having campaign ops experience, what's kind of a good, maybe kind of a supplement to that. And I would say, if you think about it from like a marketing communication standpoint, is what sort of experience do they have running a marketing calendar and making sure that, it's a lot of that's project management based type of work as well too. So they might not directly have campaign operations experience from a technical side of things, but if you have experience putting together, an integrated marketing communications plan, and then all of the related tasks around that from a calendar perspective, the technical piece, to the point about having a good consultancy or some technical resources, might help you to get at least part of the way there. And I think in the talent shortage that we're all dealing with now, the question is not what do you have right now, but how do you get to the point of
Right.
developing people at all levels of the organization chart to be able to meet some of the demands that are happening with all this new technology and all the advances that we're having in marketing technology.
I agree. I don't think it needs to be a specific role that someone has done for years, but at least having done a Marketo core concepts training, understanding what their team members might be talking about, understanding the processes they have to go through, and then also, if they're guiding a bit more on strategy, also having good understanding of capability and saying, oh, could we use dynamic content here? Could we be doing it a different approach? Something like that. Right. So I think those, I think may not need to have the hands-on experience for the years, but at least to know the core concepts and have a bit of the introductory to the platform and the way it works to talk with the team in the same way.
I guess one thing I just thought of as well is it depends on sort of the marketing operations team model that you want to run. If you want to run a centralized model where your MOPS team is running all campaign operations, or more of a decentralized model where you have other marketing managers going into the platform helping with the actual builds themselves as well. I would say if it's more of a decentralized model, then not having that prior experience is probably more okay.
Something else I thought about that I wanted to add is, I think it would be helpful to have at least that basic knowledge for bandwidth and like SLA purposes, so that if you're at the director level and you're promising things to executives or other pillars of the marketing team, and you can say we can do that in X time, but if you don't have that campaign ops experience, maybe you're short-sighting it, or maybe you're giving it like way too much time. So I don't think it's required to have that experience, but it will definitely help you and make you a better marketer and a better director overall. All right, let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about scaling companies. So as your company grows and you've had Marketo for a long time, has your Marketo instance scaled with you? And what kind of challenges have occurred in Marketo while growing rapidly? John, do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I think on the second part of that, some things that come to mind, particularly on the growing and how the importance bit to cope with the scale. Something that came up from mine is I imagine that as you grow with Marketo, you start utilizing more of the functionality, more integrations with other platforms, webinar platforms, or data like enrichment platforms. Something there could be that API limits get hit. Monitoring that, having that scheduled, I think is something to be mindful of. So those are the bits that some of the challenges that can occur as you scale, and things to keep in mind. The other one that I think is something that have a good foundation on from when it's small and new and grow with it, but is having like a strong naming convention, for example. I've worked on some projects in the past where we take the activity data out of Marketo and store it in a centralized data warehouse. And then if you want to use that, you have a nice naming convention that will talk about program type, campaign name, some maybe classifications in there. If that's consistent, you can also then do like a split text to columns type format and spread that data out. If there's inconsistencies there, then your kind of data structure blows a little bit. So things like that are some of the, bits that maybe at the beginning you think, oh, naming convention is fine, we can just call it whatever. But then once you start wanting to do more things, particularly in a more connected instance and scaling that up to where maybe native inbuilt reports are not enough and you want to take those further, then it can lead into some challenges that if you set the foundations right at the beginning can help with. Should that come to mind? I'm sure the other group have some other ideas.
Yeah, something that I have found in a couple of instances that I've gone into is knowing the technical side of Marketo in terms of how they prioritize things really helps as you scale up. So you're going from a maybe medium size to enterprise level, knowing how smart campaigns function, how request campaigns function, the priority in which they are called really helps from a technical angle, because you'll start to see for some reason you fill out a form and your email doesn't get sent for 3 hours and you have no idea why, and it's a terrible user experience for somebody that's filling out like a gated asset or something like that. So knowing the back end kind of prioritization, I think, is key when looking at scaling.
I think naturally going along with that is also the documentation. I think as you grow, number of users grows, understanding what is happening and what, if as Courtney mentioned before, sorry, if it's a decentralized model, there could be people everywhere doing different parts. So having this all clearly documented and that kind of governance model of if it is a centralized admin process, I think that is also something that would need to grow with the instance.
That's one of those things too. I was just thinking that, and I was thinking about it more from kind of what Alex was sort of saying too about the, what is your Marketo instance interfacing with across the business. So one of the things we're doing now is developing knowledge base articles privately for clients, and then putting links to the correct article within whatever program that we're developing out, so that we have a sense of those prioritization rules. And the challenge is not for the people that are currently there, but for who are you adding as you're scaling onto your team, and how do you build it in such a way that they can onboard as quickly as possible and kind of get some of the nuance. We've been in some really Fortune 10 type of company instances early on in my career, and trying to figure out exactly what's going on inside of those instances, because it's not always just in Marketo, is half the challenge.
Something else I've seen with scaling as well is just when like acquisitions occur, really sort of figuring out your strategy in terms of how you want to approach those. Does it make sense to bring it under your core Marketo instance? Should it live separately? Like making sure you have a table stakes in those conversations as soon as you can. Very important, because it can start to get very hairy very quickly if you don't.
Your session, Courtney, at the Charlotte Mug a couple of months ago on customizable CRM integrations with Marketo was interesting that way. You guys have several CRMs, don't you, that you're tied into your Marketo instance?
Right now we just have 2, and we're using a middleware for that integration. But that's been an interesting conversation we've had to have every single time we've acquired a new company, is does it make sense to continue adding additional CRMs through our middleware and making it even more customized and more complex, or how do we condense them, start to bring them under just one or two of the orgs that we have and really start to streamline our technology stack?
Yeah,
Probably.
Courtney. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it just opens up more questions than the question I answered, right? But that's the kind of considerations architecture-wise as you're scaling out.
For sure.
Yeah, to that point, Courtney, I think having a like an architecture or a structure too, if your company is big into M&A, having that plan of attack is key. I know we had at a previous company, we had kind of two tailored plans depending on the kind of size of the acquisition and kind of what the overall company strategy was on whether it's a append to the ecosystem or a takeover and put into our systems and such. But yeah, having a plan, I think there. And then to the documentation point on John's side is one thing I've learned coming into new instances frequently is making sure that you have good connections between different types of assets. So if you're using global forms, making sure you're naming them with like the ID and the name, or have some kind of documentation on where those global forms are utilized throughout different sites. Having in the description of programs the Salesforce connection, or the description, or wherever else that campaign or that program might be utilized. Having those details really helps when you bring on a new person or an M&A situation where you're bringing on a new team, possibly. They can have context very quickly just by looking at something or scanning something.
Yeah, I think that also reflects a little bit on how, if it was more like a data management or processing for a new lead that may come in, having that quite modular and seeing that it's not all built as one massive flow. And then if there's changes needed, to see that if it's a kind of a bit more modular, you can see what's happening, tweak it, and add intermediary steps as necessary. And it's a bit more, easy to digest and understand. And then you can also keep building on that and add to it over time.
All right, let's jump into nurture streams. How do I get exhausted context to receive new content in a stream? Alex.
So there's kind of different ways to view this question, I think. At a very simplistic, tactical view, you can simply add additional content to that nurture stream, and anyone that has exhausted and still lives in that stream would then receive on the next cast that set of content. However, from a strategic standpoint, depending how you've laid out that nurture and created it, there's different decisions you could make based on those people that have exhausted that content. Do you have a nurture structure that is based on life cycle stages? And are they at a certain stage that they're getting stuck? And so maybe instead of just renewing content or adding content to that stream so they start to receive more, maybe there's an opportunity there to pivot and do a different type of content stream with those people because they've stalled out. Or maybe it's people way at the top of your funnel that haven't engaged in a while. So maybe there's a re-engagement strategy there to try to kick things back off with them. So I'd love to hear what the group has to say, but I think there's a very tactical kind of process of just add new content, but then there's a strategic angle, I think, that you could look at it.
There's also a little tip you never knew about Marketo is it matters where in the stream you add the content if the people are exhausted. I remember it because it's on the certification test. It has to be at the top or it has to be at the bottom? of the stream for the exhausted context to get it.
I think at the bottom.
I think it's the bottom. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so that's something to keep in mind too. You can't just add it to the top. You have to add it to the bottom for the exhausted context to get the new content.
I like Alex's question answer though, because if you think about it, depends on what that engagement program is structured out as. If you have 30 different emails that are in that engagement, and the and to give some context for people that are kind of newer to Marketo, right? An exhausted lead is basically somebody who has gone through all of the content inside of a stream of an engagement program and hasn't done the response or anything that that would take them out of there. So ideally, if you have 30 emails, you're putting in CTA buttons that you want them to click on to kind of, let's say, join a webinar or take some sort of engagement action. So if you're at the end of that and it's, let's say, 30 emails, again, if they haven't responded to any of those emails and those are sent on a frequent cadence, that probably tells you something about the audience member and maybe that they don't belong in that engagement stream. And it might be worthwhile from a marketing communication standpoint to place them somewhere else or to try a different tactic to try and get engagement out of them. Maybe they're not interested in the service or product that you're offering. Maybe they're interested in another product or service that you're offering instead.
Yeah. Anyone else want to add to that, or should we move on? All right. Let's see, Courtney, how about this one? How do you score webinar participation? Do you do it based, like, including the form fill out and the status change? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this is one of the things that I love about Marketo is there's lots of different ways to run a scoring program. I'll just speak a little bit about what we're doing. We have a global scoring background that sort of runs as like an operational program in the background and scores all of our different campaigns in that one individual program. And we're using tokens to basically change each score. So I have an individual smart campaign that I've built for all the different scores that I want to capture based off of the activities that someone is taking with one of our campaigns. So for a webinar, for example, I will basically run a smart campaign where it's looking for someone who has either filled out the form or their program status has changed to attended. And we weight those two different statuses differently based off of, you know, if they've attended, they're more highly engaged versus just registered, which is sort of engagement, but maybe they'll watch it on demand later. So we want to weight those differently. And so I have a trigger set up to look for those two activities, either change in status to attended or filled out form on the registration page, or yeah. And then on the flow step, we have a change score that pulls in the exact scoring amount that we want to increase. And we have tokens set up to look for all of those different activities sort of happening more on a global basis. That's how we have it set up, but really it's your individual preference on if you want to do it at the individual program level, look for the change in score. I think it's a little more easy to streamline if you do set up like a global scoring program, but that's sort of how we've done it at my company.
Chloe,
Let's stay on the same topic. Michael, we've actually got a question for you about scoring. Share with us some of your best practices for building a lead scoring model.
Yeah, thanks, Chloe. I was just thinking that really dovetails into this. I'm going to just put up a couple of screenshots that I did to kind of prepare for this. But one of the first things that I'll do, which is a little different, is I like to build a histogram that shows this. This is just a sample one. This isn't actual data, but basically I'm trying to kind of show what the distribution of your behavioral or your demographic scoring is like. And because we were looking at this and saying, well, what do we want to get out of our scoring model? If all of our scores, if everybody in our database has a score of, you know, let's say 1 to 10, or they all say 5, well, that doesn't really tell us anything. We're trying to get some priorities with the scoring data to say, well, who's valuable, who's engaging, who's responding back. So we want to see a distribution of the data first to be able to see, well, is our scoring model working? Is the criteria that we have in our scoring model working? And if we see something like this, this where it's stratified with just either a 5-point or a 10-point, well, it doesn't really tell us much. It tells us, maybe this 10-point is more valuable than the 5 points, but is there more to tell? Is that a significant volume for us to be able to build out, let's say, an ideal customer profile, for example? And so one of the things that Marketo has is on their website a PDF document that talks about a lead scoring worksheet. So this is a little bit dated. It's probably off brand now. So you can see the purple, but basically it's kind of going through this exercise with your sales team, with your marketing team, and kind of saying, okay, what are the key indicators of interest that we're looking for from a prospective customer? What are our prospective customers? What are our current customers have done in the process of making a purchase decision that we really want to keep an eye out for, and set some rules in our scoring program, our centralized program that Courtney was talking about. And the last piece on this is I've translated this into a spreadsheet where we'll just go through and document some of these values. So as we're doing discovery with different clients, we'll kind of note all of this, put all of the numeric values in, and then at the end of the day, when we go back to our Marketo instance, we can just punch in those values into our scoring tokens. So we try and tokenize all of our scoring programs in the operations folder. And in that way, you not only have the data in your Marketo instance, but you also have the documentation already done to be able to explain scoring to somebody who, let's say, either doesn't have access to your instance or just wants to be able to take a look at it and doesn't have the experience of working with Marketo.
That was a great Excel file you got there.
Thanks. Oh, I guess the other thing we should say is also put into your calendar, going back to our first question, to revisit that scoring model, let's say every 6 months.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Oh, go ahead, John.
Sorry, from that worksheet, a big thing there, I think, is the that marketing sales alignment, identifying who you need to score, who sales are expecting, getting that kind of squared away first before going in and then adjusting scoring accordingly. I think the other bit I saw, Michael, in your Excel, which is interesting and sometimes overlooked, you had like decay scoring as well. But if it was like a free mail, like a Gmail or something, or if they subscribe from a newsletter, something like that, you might want to take some points off and impact the lead score that way.
I love that. Yeah, there's a old video that is in the Marketo user group YouTube channel. Subscribe and like if you're watching this on the like button below. But anyway, Elliot Lowe from Ringley did a presentation a couple of years ago about 10 pieces of data best practices, I think. And one of his points was definitely have the scoring decay, and then also have a smart campaign set up if your scoring decay drops below -50, for example, to reset that to 0. Because if you have a lead, if you don't put something like that in place, your scoring decay over time could push them to, let's say, -300 or something like that, where if they become interested, let's say 2 years from now, they're going to start from -300. There's no way that they're going to wind up showing triggering off all the values of the positive scoring filters that you have.
Yeah, got to dig themselves out of a hole to just get seen again. Yeah, I think to kind of to look at both aspects, the webinar piece of it, I like the scoring at a operational level because it's controlled centrally and scales back to the question 2 questions ago or something. It scales with you, whereas if you're scoring individually in like programs, if you're decentralized, somebody could easily throw in there a +50 for their webinar and mess up your whole scoring model. And then to kind of the scoring best practices, I can't agree more with the sales marketing alignment and documentation. The documentation for me is key because half of the scoring, once it's enabled, is the education to the marketing team and to the sales team on what's scored, how's it scored, how can you utilize that score. So one thing like we like to do is kind of bucket records into kind of like a warm, cold hot kind of thing where there might be certain campaigns where there's people right on that edge that are kind of almost there, and we want to target them for like a direct mail piece to push them to schedule that meeting or something like that. So enabling the outside organization by educating them through that documentation, I think is key.
One last thing I'll add too is just what I love about lead scoring is it's something that can continue to grow and evolve as your business does as well. So we started with the basic out of the box lead scoring in Marketo. And recently we've partnered with our data science team to build a data science backed model that pulls our Marketo activities out of Marketo via the API and is pulling in this firmographic demographic model that they've built. And sort of weighting the different components in that. And so that's been a really exciting project to work on and really cool to see like the next iteration of how you can leverage scoring to run your model.
So I came to this through 15 years of working in enterprise software sales and B2B software sales. So definitely can tell you some of the stories that we've heard over the years from different groups. It definitely helps. And on Friday on the Tucson Marketo user group, we're going to be covering that off. We'll talk a little bit more about lead routing and Marketo sales insights and some of the keys around that.
All right, let's keep going down our list of very interesting questions that we've gotten from registrants. Let's get a little more advanced. What are your recommendations, Courtney, on building the revenue cycle model in a new Marketo instance?
This is a big question, and I'm not really sure exactly like how to condense it into a short response. So I'm going to try my best, and other champs feel free to chime in and help me as well. But I would say the first place to start is really partnering with your broader demand gen and maybe just RevOps groups in your company in general, and starting to flesh out what your revenue cycle actually looks like. So what are the different stages? What is the direct path that you want your leads to take all the way through the funnel? What are your detours? How can people get held up at certain stages of the funnel? And really document that, assign clear definitions as to what is a lead. Like, is it a certain lead score that they reach in Marketo? Is it a certain activity that they have to take while they're engaging with your content? What is MQL? Making sure your sales and your marketing orgs are very aligned from that perspective. And then once you sort of get everyone on the same page, have all of that documented, that's when you're really ready to start actually building your revenue cycle model in Marketo. There's a couple of different ways to do it. We use the revenue cycle modeler builder, but we set it up so we have like the triggers actually happen within Smart Campaigns, just because we found sometimes if you set the trigger within the revenue cycle model itself, it wouldn't go through for some reason. So we set up all of our triggers to move people through a revenue cycle model in individual Smart Campaigns and a broader operational program. But that's really the first way that I would approach it, just looking for what those activities are that you need to search for that would move people from one stage to the next, and going from there.
First, Courtney, can you also go a little further to how you use that stage once someone's assigned to a stage, and how do you use it for future either comms or?
What was the question? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. So once someone is defined in a stage, so it could be like a lead or
once someone is defined in a stage.
Yeah, then how do you pick that up and use?
Yes. So there's lots of different ways to do this. We've set up a segmentation actually to look for all the different life cycle or revenue stages that we have in Marketo, so that we can segment our email audience, use dynamic content to speak differently within our emails to people in the different revenue cycle stages. You can also use Smart Campaigns to segment those audiences differently. I'm sort of blanking on the next one. I feel like I've just been rambling. So if anyone else
No.
wants to jump in.
You're hitting them home really a lot of ways.
Okay.
One of the things that kind of struck me when as you're answering that question was Alex, I think your point was like, what if somebody randomly puts a +50 into their webinar and for their scoring, and people sometimes will try and cheat the scoring system to be able to get enough leads, for example,
Right.
to let's say make quota. The revenue cycle modeler is a great way for people to be able to see, how many leads do I have in the stage before a sales qualified lead? If I'm behind on quota in a particular quarter, how do I move ahead on this? Joe Wrights did a really good presentation in the 2018 Marketo Summit, Adobe Summit, just talking about that, right? Like you're forecasting out how people are moving through this purchase behavior. And so if you're ever looking for different times to be able to try and increase the velocity, there's reporting that's inside of Marketo that allows you to talk about the revenue stage analyzer, and be able to talk about the speed at which people are trying to make purchase decisions on your products or services. So that's a piece of it. And then, to what Courtney was saying, right? Add those into some of your filters or some of your triggers for some of the different campaign ops that you're working on. And that might help you to be able to kind of accelerate sales if that's required.
Yeah, that was a great point. The success path analyzer is the report I think you were talking to, and it also will allow you to set SLAs in your revenue cycle model, so you can see if your sales team maybe isn't following up with their MQLs and the set SLA that you guys have defined. So it really is a great tool to measure how quickly people are moving through your funnel.
And understand, you're not going to get this right the first time. Nobody gets this right the first time. So take a stab at it and then test and measure and you'll get there. But nobody comes into this saying that this is an easy thing to do. So it's aspirational in some ways, but it gets done, but it takes time.
Yeah, and just to bring up John's kind of question to Courtney, I think the biggest place marketing teams fall flat when building a revenue cycle is not having a plan after it's built, like a communication plan. How do we want to communicate to these different stages? You have the backbone of your kind of whole buyer journey built out. You now are starting to segment them, but how do you want to use that? I think that's the biggest kind of transition piece that I've seen teams kind of fall flat on is they'll build it and they'll have that data behind the scenes being collected, but they're not fully utilizing that feature to its potential by having a plan on how you want to communicate, how you want to leverage those stages, how different teams might use them in different ways.
Yeah, that's a great point. We have an email marketing manager on our team actually who we go to market by vertical, and we've actually set up smart campaigns for all of our campaign managers to be able to log in and look at their database, like broken down for their vertical by our revenue cycle stages in real time. And our campaign or our email marketing manager meets with them, I want to say once a week, to just go through it and like help them organize their email strategy by the actual amount of people we have in each stages in our database. So that's been a really helpful approach. And I feel like you can finally start to see people are starting to get it. Like, oh yeah, I have this many automation qualified leads. I want them to raise their hand or request a demo. I need to message to them differently than the people who are just in our database getting to know us for the very first time.
It's kind of awesome how these different questions and conversations kind of come full circle, because I think that carries us back to the first question on ops director with no COps experience. Like having that email marketing manager, that campaign operations manager in place, that's their responsibility to help support and has that knowledge, I think is key for a marketing operations team or a general demand gen or rev ops team.
Back to the scale point, like these things you build on over time and they'll grow and scale with the company.
Yeah. I think one thing I wanted to just share really quickly was just for anybody, again, who's new to the platform. So this is ultimately what we're trying. This is a really, really, really simple stripped down version, but just it was in the instance that I have in front of me right now as like a sandbox that was in front of me. And this is what we're trying to move. This movement from being anonymous to just getting first awareness of a company to actually winning, to closing a sales opportunity. So this green path is the success path that Courtney was mentioning. And ultimately, this is what we're trying to do is we're trying to build some business and show some return on investment by moving people through this path as quickly as possible. And to Courtney's point before, right, is you'll have deviations along this path where you determine that a lead actually isn't qualified, and what do you do at that point? So I wish I had a better one in front of me that showed some of those deviations. But if you go into any Marketo instance that has revenue cycle analytics or life cycle marketing, I think it's called now, in the analytics tab at the very bottom of your table, there should be a folder that has lifecycle marketing, and you'll see two examples that Marketo always places in there. And one is like this without any detours, and one has detours that give you a starting off point to be able to look at.
I love the screenshots. They're good concrete examples you're sharing with us today, Michael.
Just trying to help.
Let's talk, let's switch gears a little bit. Let's stay on the topic of best practices, but now let's go to segmentation. Alex, would you like to weigh in on some best practices for segmentation?
Sure. So segmentation, to kind of make sure everybody's on the same page on what it is, it's a kind of a waterfall effect of using smart lists in a kind of more global manner within Marketo. So you set them up, you set a single segment up, maybe that's geo, maybe that's business unit, to Courtney's point earlier, maybe that's a revenue cycle stage. And then within that, you have a series of segmentations, I guess you'd call it. And each one is its own kind of smart list. So it does work in a waterfall effect, similar to like choices in a flow step, where you have a hierarchy. And once you fit the top, you kind of get, you fit that top one, you don't move any further down. So there is some strategy there on how you build your hierarchy. So if you have overlaps, you want to make sure ones that you want higher up are built higher in that alignment. Some best practices that I've kind of utilized segmentation for is mostly dynamic content or snippets. So when you're sending an email, if you're a global company and you have preferred language, possibly, you want to send maybe a single email, but you want to make sure that you're being relevant and adhering to that person's choice of selecting French or German or English. So that's a great way to utilize segmentation is you build out a single email, you have your segments built, you have then building dynamic content based on those segments, and you have a single email that goes out. And let's say Chloe has selected French, Michael selected German, and I've selected English. Each one of us would get the same email sent. It's one single send, but each of us would have a slightly different tailored content because we have a preferred language. So that's the kind of, I guess, the biggest use case that I've seen it is dynamic content and snippets. But it's great for reporting purposes as well. Two caveats to kind of watch out for that I'd be careful with is the first is when you have a segment, when you have a draft of it, it's already approved and you want to make updates to it, it does take some time to refresh. So my recommendation is not approve it until you're absolutely kind of ready to use it in any state, and be careful the time frame that you do go to approve it again. If you make edits or changes to it, similar to large database changes, make it at an off hour or a weekend or something like that, so it fully renders. And the second one is there's some nuances to what you can pull into a segmentation. So you can't pull in like activity data. So you can't say like people that have opened an email in the past 90 days or something like that. Those types of things. So you got to be careful on kind of what you want as your segments. Anyone else have any best practices they've used or any use cases?
One cool way that we've used a segmentation at Avid Exchange is we have one set up just to search for basically our marketable leads versus our unmarketable leads. So when you're building out like an email smart campaign, a lot of times if you don't have this segmentation built, you have to drag over to exclude everyone who's unsubscribed, exclude everyone who's marketing suspended, exclude everyone who's blacklisted, and you're pulling in over 3 to 5 filters just to exclude people every single time. Instead of doing that at the individual smart list level, we built one sort of global segmentation that looks for all of those people who fit that criteria where we would not want to send them an email. And so we just pull over the one segmentation to exclude all of those people who are basically like marketing ineligible, to exclude them using that segment.
My only comment on this is that there's also a limit to 20 that you can have in the instance. So you have to be careful if can't go too crazy. So be a bit strategic on which where you want to use them.
20 active ones. Yeah,
Okay.
20 active ones. But we've I've been in an instance before that's had more than 20, but you can only have 20 approved segmentations.
Yeah, and then 100 segments within one segmentation.
Yep,
so if you want to
100.
do a global per
Yeah.
country, too many countries for that.
Yeah, we've grouped them together to similar regions, group them together if they're not too different for any language preferences or time zone and whatnot.
I think there's a couple of things that came, the segmentations piece, the limitations you were talking about, Alex. Keith Nyberg did a session at the San Diego Mug a year ago that was talking about workarounds for some of the limitations in terms of what you can search against. And I have two sessions last year about weather-based personalizations using segmentations. And so one quick example was we built out a dummy example in there about Lowe's Home Improvement, where you could take weather-based information. If you are doing an email to a group in Boston where it's snowing and a group here in Charlotte where it's sunny, you could use Lowe's. It's just a fictitious example, but have this personalized so that instead of outdoor patio furniture for the summertime, we would offer like indoor painting or something that you would do in, if there's bad weather in Boston, and change the copy of this and change some of the CTA buttons and things like that. So lots of opportunities there.
My go-to example is if it's like a season's greetings bit, and being someone from Southern Hemisphere, snow isn't really applicable. So then you could just have a different variant of that based on the country or hemisphere.
Love that.
All right, let's switch gears a little bit. I'm aware of our time, and I definitely want to get to a final question, which as a preview is going to be everyone's best tips and trick in Marketo. But before we get to that question, let's talk a little bit about CRM, specifically Salesforce. So here's a question from a registrant. It says, our Marketo instance is 4 years old and has never included Salesforce campaigns in its sync. Can we add them now, or is it too late? Who would like to add in on that one?
I can start. I guess to me, it's never too late. I mean, that's the nice thing about Marketo is you can iterate on things very easily and add things very easily. So to me, it's never too late. I think, again, there's a tactical and a strategic element to this question. There's a why all of a sudden do you want to use them? What's the business case? There's depending on the size of your instance, there's things to consider in terms of your sync and different activities and technical elements on the sync cycle and that capacity side of things. But then you have kind of a kind of thought process on how do you want to move forward. If you do want to sync, do you want to sync everything, every program? Do you want to sync? Do you want to do a certain time before it that you need to backfill, like the past year or the past 6 months? You can use program. The nice thing, if you're using program membership in Marketo, then you already have kind of where somebody is at in that campaign, the progression that they've done. So you could do a backfill pretty easily in terms of aligning that and not having like a huge overhaul, depending on the time frame you want to go back in. But then moving forward, bringing campaigns into Salesforce brings up all kinds of other questions on how you're going to report on that, how are you going to do attribution moving forward. So the simplest answer is it's never too late, and you can definitely add it in. It doesn't matter how old your system is. There's a couple links on that Amy will share afterwards on kind of more of the process of how to enable that. And then I don't know, Courtney, I know you have kind of a custom sync, so I don't know if you want to share maybe your point of view on this, just from a not out of the box type of example.
Yeah, there's lots of different ways to integrate CRMs and in your marketing automation platform. And just due to our business case of having two separate Salesforce instances that weren't going anywhere to run two core sides of our business, we decided to use a middleware to build a completely custom sync. And so if there are nuances where you're not exactly sure the out-of-the-box sync is the right path for you, there's always another option. We use Marketo, and I love that because it's low code, no code, so it can still sort of live within my marketing operations team and not rely heavily on IT support. There are a few others as well, like Tray.io, I think is another one that lots of people love. But that just gives you a little bit more flexibility. Maybe if it's only you want to sync over campaign members to campaigns in Salesforce, and that's it. Using a middleware option like that would allow you to do that and be a little more flexible in what you're actually integrating.
All right, the last question of the evening before we wrap up. I know every champ has something to say about this. What are your tips and tricks in Marketo? Let's go around the table. I'm going to start randomly. John, let's hear yours.
Yeah, I think one of mine from efficiency side was always the asset ID or the campaign ID that's taken from the URL, adding that. For me, my favorite point was at the end of a naming convention for a program. And then, for example, if you numbered your asset was 1, 2, it would, if your program ID, which if you're not sure from the URL, it's about, I think 6, 8 characters at the end, usually 2 letters, 4 numbers, and then a letter, and then a number again. So it's that 4-number combination. You can take that, put it at the end of the program name. And if you did, like in my instance, we had the assets numbered, it would always be like 12341, and then it would refine straight to that asset. And super quick to find it. If it's still looking for it, you can still do that 1234, and it refines all the emails down to just the ones you're looking for. That was a massive time saver, especially if you've got a big instance, lots of campaigns happening.
Stole mine. That was mine as well, but I can come up with another one. But that really is such a game changer. Normally you're just like scrolling for so long if you don't use the exact description of the program, to being able to type in that ID, you just find it in a second. Or
you type invite and then you get
exactly a
programs in this invite.
Yes.
So I think similar link to that is this in the assets as well. So if you have a naming convention for your images, and if you have an email template and define spots of like a hero image, or maybe it's a tile that comes for a newsletter or a speaker image, they all have different dimensions. And if you just call it that name for saying, I need to search for a leaderboard or hero or something like that, it can help find those much easier. And at least you know then it's the right dimensions to fit the space as well. So I think I always think of Amy for this one when I say, but like there's a new feature that was released with the person flow actions available from person, where you can, for testing items, is a massive time saver as well. So rather than having to build like a quick a campaign to test an email that qualifies one person, and then building all of that, you can just now go to a person record. There's a new person actions button up the top, and from that you can do a few actions of pushing them through a campaign or sending an email. It saves a lot of time, especially when you're testing and building out something new and playing around. It's a fun one.
All right, we have 2 minutes left. My tip is actually, I co-host the European Virtual Marketo User Group, and we did an entire session on things I wish I knew about Marketo before getting started. So I've sent the link to Amy. She's going to put it here in the chat, but definitely go take a look at that one. There's a bunch of tips in there that fellow champions and fellow Marketo users have shared with us. Let's see, Alex, what is your tip about Marketo?
Mine's pretty basic, but something that really helps is having an archiving strategy. Archiving things is such a relief in terms of your lists when going through and looking for like a member of Smart List or member of List, or back to the scaling of the instance and making sure that things are deactivated and archived. So it's a simple one, but one that I don't see a lot of instances use that use that well. So yes, archiving.
But with the call out to deactivate before archiving, it won't deactivate things. So if it's archived, the trigger still will run.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, Michael, you got less than a minute. What about your tip?
Mine is to standardize your local the names of your local tokens and use inheritance. And so I work in a lot of multi-branded Marketo instances where it's a conglomerate that'll have multiple lines of business, for example. And so if you are able to keep a consistent naming of your tokens, then you can do things like set up a folder for each brand and place the same program template and clone it and put it inside of that of each of those different branded templates, and it'll inherit all of the right information for your brand identity. So that's a quick hack.
Love it. Well, thank you everyone who joined us today. Amy will send out the slides and the recording later this week. Thanks everyone, and thank you to our champions for joining us. Have a great rest of your day wherever you are in the world.
Thank you guys. It was a privilege
Thank
being with you.